I don't know, I've been labelled many labels since my ordeals. Unlike the Halawa family, I did book a ticket. I wasn't pre-booked on any holiday. I booked a ticket to go into war-torn Libya. I think when we watched here on the TV screens in Ireland what was happening, with my father being Libyan and myself spending many years from a child and also as an adult in the country, I had that connection with the Libyan people and their struggle. And so I felt that I could contribute something, and I did. I booked that ticket.
You did. I did say in your book, I remember reading a bit in your book where you said, you know, you were hesitant to go, but you were told, look, you just get ready, Allah will do the rest. Which, well, was Allah part of this?
Well, talking about faith, and as Dr. Sattar was mentioning, the strength of faith, I think my mother now would have been a very strong force, and her faith, you know, she's famously quoted as saying, if I had 20 sons, I would have sent them all. Yeah. And I think that takes a huge amount of faith to trust that your son is going, someone you love so much that you are not willing but happy to see them go into a dangerous situation, but knowing that it was for a very good cause. And so, yeah, there was always that element that you knew that if it's a just cause and a good cause, that there were, you know, that you were being blessed for it. Like,
okay,
you know.
Mary, you've written about a number of Irish people who have gone abroad to fight in wars in Syria and Libya. So it's common enough.
Well, what I find really interesting about the last 2 years is we see the new generation of young Irish Muslims of Arab extraction, like Nusayba's siblings, like Hussam, and several others who have experienced this political awakening as a result of the wave of revolutions and uprisings we've seen across North Africa and the Middle East. And that political awakening has taken many different forms, from fundraising here in Ireland, setting up NGOs and charities, protesting here in Ireland or protesting in North Africa and the Middle East, or basically going to become a fighter on the ground like Hussam did and like dozens of others did in Libya and Syria. And several of those are going over there because they're very much engaged in what's happening in the country of their parents' birth or sometimes their own birth. Others, if we're talking about Islam, Islam has very often been a motivating factor. Some people have gone from, they come from families with Islamist backgrounds here in Ireland, where they, families that would have received political asylum here in Ireland, particularly in the 1990s, because of their connections with Islamist movements in the Middle East and North Africa. So they're motivated by their faith to go over there. Some have gone over there without a particularly strong religious motivation, but have developed one when they've gotten over there.
They talk about those who have died, because some very young men have actually died. They talk about them as martyrs.
Indeed, the Arabic word shaheed, martyrs, people, anyone who dies, not necessarily on a battlefield, but it can be in an accident or in other circumstances, is in Islam afforded the term shaheed or martyr.
Roja, you're originally a Muslim from Iran, the daughter of a martyr, I understand.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Well, I was born in Iran, and I was actually born into the Iran and Iraq war. And my dad was a medical doctor, and he died during the war. Like, the circumstances around his death is very unclear, as we talked previously. But I grew up with this identity of being a daughter of a martyr. Yeah.
Historically, Islam, since the time of the Prophet Muhammad, around the 7th century, well, the interpretation is that it's been about war. It's been about building an Islamic empire. Is that a good interpretation of Islam?
Well, one thing I have to say is that there's so many different interpretations of Islam, and you know, and probably what you're hearing a lot these days is this anti-Islamic polemics that portray Islam as a violent religion. And you know, and I don't want to be an apologist, because you see certain Islamist movements who are militant and who take you know, violence as a part of their ideology. But in general, like, if you go back actually to the time of Prophet Muhammad, you see that was not the way at all. During Prophet Muhammad's lifetime, Islam was not expansionist. In the Quran itself, you don't have the word, the word jihad is there, but it means to strive. And it means, to strive in the way of God. So that could be an individual striving to be better. Or later on, it became, synonymous with holy war, which is much more Christian coinage.
Okay.
But Muhammad actually, like during Muhammad's lifetime, the wars that were fought were very much defensive wars. It was a new nascent community of Muslims that were defending themselves to survive.
Okay.
So it's very different kind of. Yeah.
Well, can I ask, maybe the thing to do is to look at what is the essence of Islam. For Christians, the essence of Christianity, Tawfiq, for instance, is love God and love your neighbour as yourself. So what would be the essence for you of Islam?
Same thing. The message for Islam is exactly the same message which is coming from the first man who God created, which is Adam. Then came Adam, and then came as Noah, then Abraham, and then you can say all the descendant of in Egypt was Hazrat Yusuf alayhi salam, then Moses, then Jesus, Hazrat Isa alayhi salam, the last prophet, Hazrat Muhammad sallallahu alayhi salam. The message for Islam is coming from the same root as well, yeah. All the prophets, including the Jesus, yeah, said exactly the same thing. Peace for the whole humanity. So the Islam means the same, peace for whole humanity. And as you mentioned about the neighbors, yeah, there are so many examples what Prophet ﷺ has said. And he said that your path to paradise can be very easy if you look after your neighbor. He didn't mention about your Muslim neighbor. He mentioned about your neighbor. How come you can harm your neighbor?
I just would think, when you say peace and your neighbour, the way you describe it, and I'd throw it out to you, Nusayba, for instance, if you were a Christian, you'd hardly be saying Muslim in Syria or in Egypt, or Pakistan for that matter. You'd be saying Islam means peace. It hardly does for me.
Yeah, I can understand what's the point, like, after living all that time in Ireland, I can understand how the people will think about it, because, like, if you look to, for instance, the Irish people in the street, like, they are very, very nice people, very warm, like when you first time, like for me, when the first time I came to Ireland, I loved Ireland for the first minute. Like, I went to a lot of countries to visit. I didn't like them, to be honest. But like, I came in Christmas time and I was walking in the street, and even with my hijab and everything, and people saw me and they was like, "Oh, Happy New Year, Merry Christmas," and I was like, wow, I love this country, you know. So that was like first time, like, and that was like 15 years ago, which is like, was hardly to see Arabic people in this country. Like, we used to know each other, all of us. But in the same time, the media's like working about Islam is equal tourism. If you're a Muslim, there's a tourism. If there's a bombing happened in a certain street, before even they do investigation or anything, they will come as, okay, Muslim did that. You know, it makes the Muslim as themselves, when they walk in the street and anything happening, they will be like, oh my God, they're gonna think I'm the one who did it.
But Mary, I would just be interested to see what you think for Christians living in other countries like Libya or Syria or Pakistan. Islam is something to be feared. It's not a religion of peace.
Well, firstly, there are no Christians in Libya, but certainly in Syria, Egypt, and
so this shows you my ignorance, doesn't it?
In Syria, Egypt, and Pakistan,
yeah,
there are considerable Christian populations, and yes, there have, as we've been seeing in recent weeks, there have been attacks by some Muslims on members of those Christian communities. But I think Roja touch on a very, very important point here. It's a question of interpretation. I think very often people tend, when they don't know very much about Islam or haven't encountered Islam or Muslims very much, they tend to see Islam as a monolith when it's not. There are the basic tenets of faith in Islam, but then there are centuries of interpretations of the sacred texts of Islam with so many different schools. And Islam, as it is practiced today in this globalized, interconnected world we live in today, just varies to such a degree in terms of how it's actually practiced, because when you talk about Indonesia, which is the world's most populous Muslim majority country, or you look at Egypt, Islam as it is practiced tends to vary a lot according to the cultural environment in which it's practiced. So I think it's very, very important to state that Islam is today, it's very, very diverse. It's not a monolith. So sure, you have people in Pakistan, in Syria and in Egypt who feel that there is something in their interpretation of Islam that justifies an attack on Christians, but there are many others that would dispute that.
Okay, so I want to go to Sam, because you haven't heard from him in a few minutes, but so it's down to interpretation, is it, in terms of the Quran? Who interprets the Quran?
Yeah, well, the way I suppose, as Mary was saying there, Indonesia, the difference between Indonesia and, say, Arab countries, I think it's, as Mary says, to do with culture and background as well. So you have Indonesia, Malaysia, so very timid people already. And so with their way of Islam is so kind, and I know from mixing with Malaysian doctors here in my youth and stuff like that, I know how they are around each other compared to Arabs, for example, when they talk to each other. People are